Hannah is my little rainbow girl. She is still the happiest person I know. She still gives you cuddles that will crack ribs.
People always make the cliche to me, oh, you're making such good memories with that. And I'm like, stop saying to me about the fact I'm making memories, because that idea of making memories is actually denying there is hope.
So the hope is finding those moments that when things do happen and things get very bleak, they're the little candle in the darkness.
Rachel, Eli, thanks for talking to us. Can you just start by telling us a little bit about Hannah and when you first noticed that something wasn't quite right?
Hannah started school and preschool as a very, very bright, independent child. I mean, when she was into kindergarten, she actually won like the public speaking competition for their year group. And then about halfway through the year, I was like, things are starting to not seem quite right. So we started off, with a speech therapist, because the other children in her year, were taking off and she was sort of plateauing. And then, so then we started off with an autism diagnosis, and then that then turned into an intellectual disability diagnosis, but yet things didn't still seem to be right. And then the floodgates opened. So then suddenly the other therapists and other people that were in our lives started commenting that things didn't quite seem to be right. And what was the trigger to get towards the diagnosis was that Hannah started having seizures. So had an MRI. So this is when she had just turned 10. Like it was her 13th birthday on Friday. So it was literally exactly this time of the year, October. She had the seizures. And then the MRI, and that's when they saw the brain atrophy, and 10-year-old children do not have brain atrophy. So then that was then the path to genetic testing, and then finally the diagnosis of childhood dementia.
Before we move on, in those early stages before you knew what was going on, what justifications or explanations were you giving yourself for the subtle differences that you were seeing in Hannah?
I was looking at Hannah going, no, almost in denial. No, there's nothing wrong here. She's just one of those weird kids you encounter every once in a while. The clincher for me was the MRI that Rachel mentioned after the seizures. I was in the MRI room with Hannah, and I did the normal things you do when you go near a magnet that size. I took all my keys out of my pockets, not my phone on the bench and all that sort of stuff, but I'd forgotten I'd left my steel cap boots on. So after about 45 minutes of MRI, we walk out, and for me, looking at I'm not a neurologist, I'm not a medical practitioner, but I know what a normal MRI looks like, and it wasn't. It's like, well, shit. This is the path we're on.
You mentioned that Hannah had done very well early on.
Oh yeah, she was. We're both
clever.
No, it's not so much that. Like, we value education as teachers, and
Absolutely.
so she had been brought up in a very rich environment where she'd been read to, she'd been encouraged to learn. I'd take her grocery shopping and would be having conversations about what fruit and vegetables we were going to buy. I mean, just what I would consider a normal, preschool education of bringing up a child. And that's why Hannah was later in being diagnosed, because I think because we'd managed to enrich her as a younger child, because the type of dementia Hannah has, generally the children, this is only 17 recorded worldwide in the literature, and of those 17, they were all diagnosed as toddlers, very early children. I mean, we are talking about childhood dementia here, and apart from one, they all had died by the time they were 10. Hannah was diagnosed at 10, and I think the fact that we'd managed to enrich her education and support her and work through with therapy and other bits and pieces, we'd sort of in some ways masked the symptoms until you just couldn't mask it anymore. And my number one message to all mothers, whether it's talking about childhood dementia or anything else, is trust your intuition. If you think there's something, then follow through. But unfortunately, when you're up against professionals what would you know? Well, I do know. I'm the child's mother. I know.
Yeah, anyway, there's something going on here, but we're not sure what it is. And I mean, when we had the original autism and intellectual disability noticed, one of the good/bad things was everybody's got a phone these days that's got a selfie camera, so you do selfies and videos with the kids, and I've got tons of them where the kids are eating my phone and that sort of stuff. And I look back on the videos I used to shoot with Hannah when she was 4 or 5, that sort of stuff, and I go, oh.
Can you see those signs now?
You can. And they're so
Hindsight's great.
expletingly obvious. And you look back and you go, how the did I miss that?
Yeah.
I'm an educational professional, for God's sake. I should be picking this up, and I didn't. But then you
What
don't.
is it that you see when you look back at those videos?
A lot of repetitive behaviours, which is more autism than anything else. We did things like we read to Hannah every night. We made sure we sat down and watched videos with her. All of these sort of things, not because we're teachers and that's what you should be doing, but because we seriously invested in our kids' intellectual development. And everyone says do your Sudokus and those sort of things to stave off Alzheimer's and that sort of stuff. And I think that's what we did inadvertently, was mask it, because we saw Hannah went into school and with being able to read and things like that.
So
And
she was really ahead of the game.
She was.
Because of your input.
yeah, she was ahead of the game. And then everybody else went, as kids do, when they hit school, they start to take off, and she just sort of plateaued.
And then started to decline. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh.
I can't imagine how hard this has been for you guys, like, to handle. I mean, once Hannah was diagnosed with childhood dementia, which is just unbelievable. It's the last thing you ever want to hear. What was your initial reaction? How did you get your head around that?
Well, that was interesting. We were having a conversation with Owen, the paediatrician, and was like, right, let's see if we can't figure out what's the cause for this. So myself, Rachel and Hannah all had bloods taken, and they were sent off to Finland for genetic testing because that's where it's done. And then we had a big meeting with the geneticist and the paediatrician and Rachel and I, and they said, right, Hannah has UBTF, neurodegenerative disorder. And both Rachel and I went, yep, cool, thanks, that's brilliant, no problems.
Now what?
Because we didn't have a clue what this was. And you know, Rachel's a brilliant PhD researcher, and I sort of faked my way through mine. But we can research. So we went and did a bit of a literature review, and after we had a read of what this pathway is, it's like, oh,
My God.
crap.
So it was not put to you as childhood dementia initially?
No. It was literally, this is the genetic abnormality.
So how did you come to the realisation that it falls into that category?
That was our amazing GP, to be honest. I know Eli had seen the MRIs and he had his opinion, but I hadn't seen those. And so I turned up I could tell you it was Thursday, the 17th of December, because school broke up the next day, and I thought I was turning up just to get some blood test results and the things to take back to the specialist from our GP. And he was like, oh, brain atrophy, talking about all these things that were going on. And I walked out of there going, what the hell? Like, I was completely blindsided because our GP thought the specialist had contacted us, and like the neurologist had contacted us and hadn't. What was, a 10-minute consultation to collect results was an hour of, oh, wow, okay. And I do feel so sorry for him because he didn't know that I didn't know. And so then turning up to school the next day, it was the very final day of term. It was the pool part. It was the whole school pool party. Thankfully, none of the children in front of me actually did anything stupid because I was there in body.
But not in mine.
Not in mine. I couldn't even speak that day. But I mean, of course, I had to turn up because that's the expectation of and that's when you realise, just thinking about all these things, realising that, and it was that Christmas then I just couldn't function without thinking about Hannah dying and all the end of life things, because that was sort of, I've now understand that's part of that trauma and grief and shock, but no one had actually spoken to me about any of that. And so just that whole my world was
Smashed.
absolutely smashed. Hannah was, I know children are absolute gifts, but Hannah had been very hard to come by. We'd had multiple miscarriages and things before she was born. So, I mean, she was an absolute precious gift. And then to be told that she's being taken away from me again, I mean, yeah, it was devastating. We've then been doing a lot of work with the Childhood Dementia Initiative because at the time there was no support anywhere. I rang, you go, okay, so childhood dementia, Google. Okay, where can I get support? Nowhere, because all the dementia support for, older, well, I won't say, I mean, I know there's young onset.
You can call Jim old.
But
oh, yeah.
It's
He's
still,
always got
but
to
it's
stick the knife in.
adult onset. It's not
Yeah.
children. And so there was just nowhere to get any help, any information, any support. And then finally, I did make contact with the Childhood Dementia Initiative, and now we've worked really closely to start to make resources. So one of the things we've made is what we call the Finding Hope letter, which is for families that were in that position of going, we've just had this information, we've just had this diagnosis, now what? So at least there's now some resources, some support.
The major thing with the Childhood Dementia Initiative and that particular letter for me is there's still fun. Hannah is my little rainbow girl. She is still the happiest person I know. She still gives you cuddles that will crack ribs. She still watch out when she's got her wheelchair on speed 5, she'll break an ankle, all of that sort of stuff. She's still amazingly Hannah. That diagnosis pretty much stopped us for a little while. And then it's been a lot of time for me to realise that life doesn't stop. You've still got to get up in the morning and go to work. You've still got to mark papers, teacher. You've still got to find the fun.
Hannah is always the happy-go-lucky Hannah. Yes, she's aware of the fact that she's losing skills and abilities, but the impact is on her brother, that he is the one that sees on a daily basis, his big sister. If Eli and I are not looking after Hannah, it's Benjamin that's with her because she can't be left unsupervised. So he's, pretty much her primary carer because it's also Benjamin that she always goes to and wants to be with. He's, the outdoor adventure. He was always the out there doing everything and just watching his change and withdrawal and the physical, because he carries his anxiety and trauma in physical symptoms. So the constant feeling sick,
Sore tummies,
sore
headaches.
tummies, like the change in him from his sister's diagnosis. So it's not about, because everyone always says to me, how's Hannah? Oh, she's fine.
Benji.
It's Benji that's the challenge.
And he's dealing with a lot of the bigger picture questions that we shouldn't be dealing with till we're adults.
Yeah.
He's dealing, we're walking into the house not long ago and he said, Dad, what happens when you die? And we don't shy away from those conversations, but it's hard to not try to soften that particular blow as a parent.
Because that's the job, right? You're always trying to soften everything.
Yeah. But I mean, it's also, it's not going to be a fun day when things finally do happen. But if I can prepare Benji a bit for it, I'm going to do that.
I know you wear a bracelet that, normally you wouldn't even really notice, but it has some special meaning to you. Tell us a little bit about the bracelet.
We finally had a night out a little while ago, and so got to get dressed up and wear my good jewellery. So there's a family bracelet sort of passed down. I think I'm the 7th generation to receive it for our 40th birthdays. So sort of it was more recently it's been passed to us on our 40th birthdays.
There's so much sentiment as well when it's passed down. Like
yeah,
that.
and then suddenly I'm like taking it off after having been out to dinner, probably the one too many wines, which is why I was feeling emotional, going, oh God, what am I going to do with this? Like, I'm not going to be able to give this to Hannah. Like, and it's just those triggers of those moments of
pin drop moments.
Those moments of grief, or when you suddenly, you try, you try your best just to leave it out, because and I know I'm slightly irreverent sometimes when I'm talking about some of this childhood dementia stuff, because it's like the line between the tears and the laughter is just so paper thin.
You've got to laugh.
That if you don't try and see the joy, then then I'd be consumed by the grief, and I can't do that. I can't let that happen. I can't do that for Benjamin. I can't do that for Hannah. I can't do that for my own mental health. So
it must be such a roller coaster of emotion, especially with him to consider, because you've still got to have the ups and try and make fun out of life, haven't you, for the family?
Absolutely.
You get those little things. I was driving to work, not last week, the week before, and that little thought popped into my head was, I'm not going to get the chance to give Hannah away at her wedding. And I got to work and my hands were aching, and I looked down at my fingertips and I've got the impression of the stitching from the steering wheel in the back of my hands, because I had crunched onto the steering wheel
hard.
that tight. I'm not going to watch Hannah graduate from university, and you talked about a roller coaster of emotion. That first, you go through the whole grief process in the drive to work, and it's, oh yeah, no, I won't. God, I'm pissed off about that. And then my mental health has been a bloody roller coaster, and then depressed, and then anxious, and then I've got to get control of this because I've got to get back into it, put myself in the headspace for school and all that sort of stuff. And it's just dealing with that. There are always little thoughts
That pop in.
that just go, hello, I'm here to make your bad day. That sort of stuff. So
I guess it's just the dual reality of pretty much every moment of joy is also tinged with a moment of sadness. Just that question of, well, we will be able to do this again.
The unknown of how soon, how long, what's ahead.
And that's
It's living every single day with trying to compartmentalise that.
You have to find those hilarious moments. Benji's really good at it. You have to have those moments
To lift you.
where you come home and the kids at school have been absolute monsters and the drive home has been hellish, and Hannah gives you one of those hugs and it's like, go for it, honey, break as many ribs as you feel like. And she just wraps you up. Those moments are what keep me going.
So I guess hope is not an idea that we generally tend to associate with dementia, but I know for you that's been a very important concept. You're talking about finding the light, but I'm interested in the idea of hope and some of the resources you've worked on with the CDI, I know, focus on that. What does it mean for your family? How do you find hope in all of this? Because I guess you're describing light moments tinged with sadness. Where does hope fit?
It wasn't there for a long time. I can't speak for Rachel, but for me, there was no hope for a little while. The path we're on, you know what the outcome's going to be. So the hope is finding those moments that when things do happen and things get very bleak, they're the little candle in the darkness. And hope is looking for them, because they're not going to show up if you don't look for them. So that's what hope is for me.
For me personally, it's about the joy. I think I probably use the word joy more than hope, that you just live life to the full, live in this moment, enjoy this moment. And I know people always make the cliche to me, oh, you're making such good memories with that. And I'm like, stop saying to me about the fact I'm making memories, because that idea of making memories is actually denying there is hope. But for me, hope is actually about creating creating a path forward and giving strength to other people that may also find themselves on this path, like, so that there is hope for advocacy, there's hope in research. I'm not saying that it's going to be finding a cure, but at least finding hope.
So hope is, I hope I'm going to be able to do this. I hope I can step up, not just as Hannah's parent, but as dad, as a bloke. I hope I'm going to have the strength to do this. And I haven't been wrong so far. I hope my strength lasts.
Rachel, Eli, I'm sure everyone listening to this will want to say thank you for sharing your story, and I think everyone will also want to wish you well.
Thank you both so much.
We'll have to do this again sometime.
Hold the Moment is a podcast from Dementia Australia, produced by Deadset Studios.